Hi! The wind screamed through the chinks of the wooden house, rattling the shutters like bones in a tin can. In the dim kitchen, fire flared from the stovetop, racing up the frayed curtain like a match to dry grass. Ellie Mae Harper, sleeves rolled and hands raw, beat at the flames with a soaked rag, her breaths shallow and fast. Smoke curled into her lungs. Behind her, a man's silhouette filled the doorway, tall, still as stone. Andrew Clark's voice cut through the panic, sharp as a whip crack. "If you can't handle this, you can leave." The words froze her. Not the fire, not the smoke, but that voice, final, cold, judging. Her hands stopped. The wet rag dropped. The flame hissed but lived. She turned to face him, eyes stinging. And for a long, brittle second, the only sound was the wind howling like a warning through the broken seams of a house that no longer felt like shelter. Ellie Mae Harper had once believed in goodness, in clean aprons, quiet mornings, and a world that rewarded kindness. That was before the mine took her husband, and the town took the rest. Ben Harper had been 32 when he went down into the shaft and never came up. The company called it an accident. The coroner called it misfortune. The women at church called it God's will. And then, quietly, they stopped calling it all. A week after the funeral, the rent was raised. The following month, her name was scratched off the charity rolls, replaced by the wives of living men. Whispers bloomed behind her back like weeds. Some said she'd pushed Ben to work too many shifts. Others that he'd caught her eyeing another man, that maybe he hadn't slipped after all. By spring, she was as good as invisible. She moved in with her aunt on the edge of town, a brittle woman who thought grief should be kept quiet and work done early. But grief made Ellie slow, and work only reminded her of what she'd lost. When she dropped a dish or overslept, her aunt would mutter, "Useless girl," with a sneer that cracked like a whip. One morning, Ellie found her suitcase on the stoop. She wandered, spent her days searching shop windows for signs that read "Help Wanted," and her nights folded into church pews long after the candles had gone out. She once dreamed of training as a nurse, of healing broken bodies and being useful in ways that mattered, but laughter followed her into every building where she dared to ask. "You?" They'd scoff. "What kind of doctor wants a widow with no references?" She stopped dreaming. It was only by accident she found the letter, wedged between the pages of her Bible like a forgotten promise. It had been sent months ago by a woman named Margaret Bell, who'd heard from a cousin that Ellie cooked well. The letter was short, formal. A job offer, out west, to cook for the Clark Ranch, 3 days' ride beyond the last post office. Not much, it read, but quiet. Room and board. No guests. That night, Ellie packed her things. She was not going for hope or change or fresh starts. She was going because no one else had asked. Because some doors don't open unless you walk through the fire first. She arrived as snow began to fall. The ranch looked like a place God had passed over. Wide land, wind-bent trees, fences clawing against the prairie. No one met her at the gate. The only sign of welcome was the smoke curling from the stovepipe. She knocked. The door opened. A man nodded once and stepped aside. "Andrew Clark," he said. "Cook's quarters are through the kitchen." No handshake, no warmth. But Ellie stepped inside anyway. Not for change. Only to survive. The frost had etched lace on the kitchen window by morning. Ellie stood alone, sleeves rolled, hands deep in dough. The stove crackled behind her. The only sound in a house that breathed like it hated to be awake. Outside, wind worried the fence posts. Inside, her fingers moved with muscle memory. Flour, salt, a splash of milk. Bread was a quiet language. One no one had ever mocked her for speaking. She didn't notice the child at first. A whisper of movement, that's all it was. Then a floorboard creaked near the doorway. Ellie turned. A little girl stood just beyond the threshold. Barefoot. Small. She clutched a rag doll whose head hung loose on a thread. Her hair was a tangle of chestnut curls, her cheeks pale with sleep, and her eyes, impossibly large, impossibly blue, fixed on Ellie like she was something strange. "Are you?" the girl began, voice as thin as breath. "Gonna stay?" Ellie blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. The girl clutched the doll tighter. "'Cause the last lady left," Papa yelled. Ellie wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm just the cook," she said softly, not knowing whether to kneel or keep still. The girl nodded like this meant something, then stepped inside the kitchen. Her feet left little prints on the cold wood. She walked slowly to the chair by the stove and sat, as if this were her place and always had been. The doll dropped into her lap. Ellie turned back to the dough, unsure what to do with the silence now broken. "I'm Lucy," the girl said. Ellie nodded, shaping the bread. "I'm Ellie." Lucy watched her, not in the way of children, but in the way of someone who's already learned that watching tells more truth than asking. "Do you have kids?" Lucy asked. "No," Ellie said. A pause. "I wanted to be a nurse once, but things changed." Lucy tilted her head. "Like when Papa stopped singing?" Ellie didn't answer. They stayed like that for a long while. One kneading dough, the other holding a doll whose seams had come undone. That night, Ellie heard her name again. Not from Andrew, who hadn't spoken more than 2 words since her arrival, but from the small voice that drifted through the hallway like candlelight. "Papa," Lucy was saying, "can she tuck me in too?" Ellie froze, halfway through folding laundry. "She only cooks," Andrew replied. Sharp, final. Ellie's hands trembled over the fabric. But Lucy's reply came soft, insistent. "She didn't burn the bread, and she made the butter warm, like Mama used to." Silence. Then Andrew's boots. A door closing. Ellie stood in the dim light of her room, linen clenched between her fingers. She had not asked to be seen. She had only come to cook, to keep quiet, to earn her room. But the child had reached for something. And something inside Ellie had stirred, like an old song remembered in the dark. The next morning, she left a spoonful of honey by Lucy's cup. She didn't say a word. But when Lucy smiled, her teeth just barely peeking through, Ellie felt something she hadn't in years. Not joy, something quieter. A beginning. The fever came on fast. One moment, Lucy was chasing chickens through the muddy yard with her doll tied to her waist by a frayed ribbon. The next, she lay limp in her bed, skin flushed and damp, her breath shallow and fast. Ellie noticed first. She always did. The subtle wrongness in a child's eyes, the sag in the shoulders, the refusal of supper. When Lucy didn't appear in the kitchen that evening, Ellie went looking. Found her curled under a patchwork quilt, cheeks glowing with the fire of sickness, murmuring nonsense in her sleep. She touched the girl's forehead and felt heat bloom beneath her palm. Panic twisted in her gut. She ran for Andrew, found him in the barn, sharpening a blade in long, angry strokes. She didn't knock, didn't hesitate. "Your daughter's burning up," she said. He looked up, eyes narrowing. "It's winter. Kids catch cold." "She's not cold," Ellie snapped. "She's burning. She's sick." Andrew tossed the knife into a pail of sawdust and followed her without a word. Inside, Lucy muttered in her fever dream, names Ellie didn't recognize, broken sentences like, "Not the blue one," and "Mama, wait." Her small limbs twitched beneath the quilt. Andrew stood in the doorway like a man carved from wood. "Well," he said. Ellie turned on him. "Do you have any willow bark? Chamomile? Echinacea?" He blinked. She took that as a no. Ellie rummaged through the kitchen drawers, through the baskets by the stove, the shelves near the hearth. Found a forgotten satchel of herbs. Dusty, brittle, but better than nothing. She boiled water, crushed leaves, stirred mixtures, poured spoonfuls into a chipped mug. "She won't drink," Andrew said. "She doesn't have to," Ellie replied. She soaked a cloth and pressed it to Lucy's lips, then her forehead, her chest. "She needs sweat. She needs time." Andrew hovered behind her, silent. She ignored him. Through the night, Ellie stayed at Lucy's side, wiping her face, whispering lullabies she half remembered from childhood. She slept in a chair by the bed, head bent awkwardly against the wall, waking every time Lucy's breathing changed. By morning, the fever hadn't broken, but it hadn't worsened either, and that Ellie knew was its own kind of victory. Andrew appeared at the door just after sunrise. Ellie hadn't left the girl's side. Her hair was tied back in a hasty knot. Her dress was wrinkled, her hands stained with herb and sweat. She looked up as he entered. "She's stable," she said, "but weak." He stepped inside, slowly, as if afraid of breaking something invisible. "You weren't hired to play nurse," he said. "I wasn't hired to let a child die," she replied. A long silence hung between them. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching Lucy sleep. "She hasn't asked for her mother in weeks," he said, barely above a whisper. "Not since you came." Ellie blinked. "I'm not trying to replace." "I know." He scratched his chin, looked away. "You want something for this?" "I want her well," Ellie said. "That's all." Andrew studied her like she was something strange, something dangerous, a woman who cared without asking for anything. He turned and walked out without a word. But later that day, Ellie found a fresh tin of dried herbs by the stove. Willow bark, proper chamomile, even honey. She didn't ask where he got them. She simply smiled and brewed more tea. The fever broke on the third night. Lucy woke with a weak cough and a clearer gaze. Ellie fed her broth with a spoon, watched as color returned to her cheeks, one slow breath at a time. "Did you stay?" Lucy asked, voice barely more than a breath. "Yes, baby," Ellie said. "I stayed." The girl nodded. "Mama used to sing when I was sick." Ellie hesitated, then sang softly, awkwardly at first. A hymn her mother used to hum while mending clothes by firelight. Lucy drifted off again with a tiny smile curled in her sleep. That night, Ellie tucked her in. She was halfway out the room when she heard Lucy whisper, "You smell like home." Ellie pressed her palm to her chest and fled before the tears came. She hadn't cried in years. Not for Ben. Not when she'd left town. Not when the world had grown sharp and cold. But now, a child's words undid all the stitching she'd held herself together with. She leaned against the kitchen door and wept quietly, so the house wouldn't know. The next morning, the house felt different. The floor still creaked. The wind still rattled the glass. But the silence wasn't as cruel. Lucy sat at the table, pale but smiling, spooning porridge into her mouth with small, determined bites. Andrew entered halfway through breakfast. His eyes flicked from Lucy to Ellie, then back again. He poured himself coffee and sat without comment. Then, as Ellie turned back toward the stove, his voice, low and careful, surprised her. "She's stronger. Because of you." Ellie paused. "I just did what anyone would." He shook his head. "Not around here." They sat in the shared quiet, the kind that doesn't press down but opens space between people. Ellie had crossed an invisible line. She was no longer just the cook. She was something else now, whether Andrew wanted it or not. The storm didn't begin in the sky. It started in whispers. It began in the corners of rooms Ellie never entered, behind counters where her coins were still accepted but her voice was not. At the dry goods store, someone coughed into their hand and said too loudly, "You'd think a man like Andrew Clark could find a real wife, not some stray." At church, Lucy ran to take Ellie's hand on the steps, only for other mothers to clutch their children's arms a little tighter, as if contact might contaminate. The air grew thick with silence whenever she entered a room. And in silence, danger brews. Back at the ranch, the sky itself began to change, as if echoing the shift. Days turned dull and wind-washed. Dust moved through the valley in low spirals, crawling through every crack in the house. It was the kind of wind that didn't howl but watched. Andrew said nothing at first. He never did. But Ellie could tell he knew. The tension in his jaw. The way he checked the barn doors twice each night. The rifle that remained just within reach on the porch rail. Then came the sheriff. Sheriff Daniels rode in like he owned the wind. Dust clung to his duster and settled in the creases of his boots. His hat tilted forward, shadowing eyes that didn't blink enough. Behind him, the horizon rolled pale and empty, as if the rest of the world had turned its back. Andrew met him on the porch. "You're far from town," he said. Daniels didn't dismount. "Word travels." Andrew didn't answer. The sheriff let the silence sit, then filled it. "There's talk, Andrew. About you. About her." He nodded toward the window where Ellie stood, barely visible behind the curtains. She didn't flinch, just watched. "You've got a child under your roof, a woman with a reputation, and no wife to speak of. Makes people uneasy." Andrew crossed his arms. "They can be uneasy on their own land." Daniels leaned forward in his saddle. "Some say the widow's aiming for more than a cook's wages. Some say she's playing your little girl like a fiddle. Sweet words. Warm soup. Easy tucking in at night." Andrew's voice was low. "Say what you came to say." Danielle's smirk turned thin. "I came to remind you this town doesn't forget. And it sure as hell don't forgive easy. A woman like her, one with a name wrapped in death, don't just disappear into honest work. Folks remember." Andrew didn't blink. "Let them." Daniels clicked his reins. "Storm's coming, Clark. Hope you've got more than a good cook to keep the place standing." Then he turned and rode off. The wind rose that night, not with warning, but with wrath. By midnight, the barn groaned. Nails loosened from old boards. Horses kicked against their stalls. Ellie woke to the sound of something slamming. A sharp, unnatural crack. She threw on her boots and bolted down the stairs. Andrew met her at the door. The latch on the east wall's gone. The wind's tearing at it. "I'll help," Ellie said, already pulling on her coat. "Stay here with Lucy. She's sleeping." But neither of them stayed. They moved through the storm like ghosts. Eyes narrowed against the flying grit, hands stretched toward the broken hinge. The wind had ripped the door half open, slamming it against the side of the barn with every gust. Inside, a beam creaked high in the loft. Andrew shouted, "We've got to brace it." Ellie turned to look, just in time to see Lucy, barefoot and half asleep, standing in the open barn door. "Lucy!" she cried. The beam gave way. Ellie didn't think. She ran. The wood came down like judgment, heavy, final. But she reached Lucy first. She flung herself over the child and felt the full force of the beam slam across her back. Pain bloomed white-hot, her breath crushed from her lungs. Then everything went still. Andrew's arms came around them, dragging the beam away, pulling them free. Ellie collapsed against him, Lucy safe but sobbing. No one spoke. The storm howled, but the worst of it had already passed. Not in the sky, but in the choice Ellie made, without thinking, to put herself between death and a child not hers. 3 days passed. Ellie moved slow. Her ribs ached. A dark bruise bloomed down her side like ink through water. She said little, did less, but refused to rest. Lucy didn't leave her side. The girl held her hand while she stirred soup, fetched her shawl without being asked. And each night, when Ellie sat in the rocker by the fire, Lucy curled up at her feet, silent but close. Andrew watched from the doorway more often than not. His eyes held something unreadable. Not fear, not pity, something quieter. Then, on the 4th day, the wind returned, not from the sky this time, but from town. Daniels arrived uninvited. He didn't knock. He stepped into the kitchen with mud on his boots and words on his tongue. "Afternoon," he said. "Heard the ranch took a beating. Thought I'd check the damage. And the company." Ellie didn't answer. She stood at the stove, holding a ladle like a weapon she hadn't yet decided to use. Daniels wandered, eyes crawling over every surface. "Funny thing, the more I hear about your cook, the less it sounds like a woman looking for work. Sounds more like someone looking for sympathy, and maybe a man to hide behind." Andrew entered, quiet as a shadow. Daniels didn't turn. "Your girl calls her mama now, I hear." Touching. "Town folks are real moved. Can't stop talking." Andrew stepped closer. "You've said enough." Daniels smiled. "Haven't even started." He turned to Ellie. "They say you let your husband die. That you heard the collapse and kept stirring your stew. That you cried crocodile tears all the way to the bank." Ellie's knuckles whitened on the ladle. Daniels tilted his head. "And now here you are. New house, new man, new child. Tell me, do you always land on your feet? Or is that just the widow's charm? Andrew's fist landed before the words could finish. Daniels hit the ground, blood blooming from his nose. Andrew stood over him. You step foot on this land again, and you won't walk back. Daniels spat blood. You'll regret this. Andrew didn't move. I already regret letting you speak. The sheriff staggered to his feet and left without another word. But he left the storm behind. After that, no one came to the ranch. No mail. No groceries delivered. No pastor knocking with church flyers. The town had made its decision. Ellie noticed it first. Then Lucy, whose friends didn't wave from wagons anymore. Whose smiles were only offered when she was alone. One afternoon, she asked, "Is it because I love Ellie?" Andrew didn't know what to say, so Ellie did. It's because they're afraid of what they don't understand. But you're not wrong to love. Lucy nodded slowly. Mama said love was like kindling. Doesn't matter who starts it. Just needs breath to stay alive. And then Andrew said the one thing he hadn't yet allowed himself to believe. She's right. That night, Ellie sat on the porch as twilight spread. Andrew joined her. For a while they said nothing. Just listened to the land breathe. Then he spoke. When my wife died, I didn't know how to talk to my daughter. I didn't know how to hold her without feeling like something was missing. But when Lucy's sick, she asks for you. When she's scared, she looks for you. Ellie turned. And you? He didn't answer right away. Then, with effort, you were never just the cook. The stars blinked into the sky, one by one. And Ellie, for the first time, let herself believe she was no longer just surviving. She was becoming someone again. Someone who mattered. The town festival arrived with banners that didn't flutter and music that sounded thin in the dry air. Children ran barefoot between booths, ribbons tangled in their hair. The scent of roasted corn and wood smoke hung heavy, trying to make joy out of tension. Ellie stood at the edge of the crowd, unsure if she belonged. She hadn't planned to come. Not after the whispers, the stares. But Lucy had begged. Just to see the ribbons, she'd said. You don't have to talk to anyone. Just stand with me. So Ellie had dressed in her plainest dress, tied back her hair, and walked beside Lucy and Andrew down into the valley where the town came alive once a year. First, no one looked. Then everyone did. The silence wasn't loud, just sharp, like the moment before a violin string breaks. Someone muttered, "That's her." And Ellie felt her spine go straight, though her hands trembled. Lucy squeezed her hand and tugged her toward the ring of dancers at the town square. "Will you dance with me?" Before Ellie could answer, Andrew spoke behind them. "She's not here to dance," he said, voice level. A pause. The same quiet judgment Ellie had learned to expect. "She only cooks," someone near the bandstand muttered, echoing words from a house where warmth had once been rationed. Ellie turned to leave. Then Andrew took her hand. Not gently, not shyly. He stepped into the center of the square, Ellie beside him, and faced the gathered crowd. "I was wrong," he said, loud enough to carry. "Wrong to keep her in the kitchen. Wrong to let your words decide who she is." Eyes flicked between them. Ellie tried to pull her hand away. Andrew didn't let go. "This woman saved my daughter. She saved me." No one spoke. And then, as simply as closing a door, he led Ellie into the circle. The fiddle picked up. The dancers made room. And for the first time in years, Ellie moved in public not as a shadow, but as someone claimed. Lucy clapped from the edge of the ring, barefoot and beaming. Ellie couldn't smile, not yet, but she looked up at Andrew's face and saw no hesitation, only choice. Spring came late that year. The frost held on through April, stubborn as memory. But when it broke, the valley softened. Grass pushed through hard soil. The creek filled with meltwater. And the barn, once a place of dust, bruises, and near death, changed. Andrew cleared out the hay and broken beams. Ellie swept the floor, again and again, until the wood showed itself clean. Lucy painted flowers on the walls with a brush too big for her hand. And by May, the barn held benches. A blackboard, chalk, Ellie's handwriting, once used only for recipes and receipts, now shaped letters in front of a dozen squirming children. The rancher's kids, once forbidden to come near, now came every morning, with lunch tins and questions and skinned knees, and always Lucy beside her. "Today we learn about kindness," Ellie would say, and the children would sit straighter. She taught them how to read, how to write, but more than that, how to listen. Sometimes, when the room fell quiet, Andrew would stand in the doorway, arms folded, watching. He never spoke during lessons, just listened, like the land itself, solid, silent. Sure, in the evenings they sat on the porch, the three of them, Lucy between, Ellie stitching, Andrew whittling, the dog asleep by their feet. One night, as the sun slipped behind the hills, Lucy looked up at Ellie and whispered, "Mama, can you tuck me in tonight?" Ellie didn't answer right away. Her needle paused in the fabric. She looked at Andrew, who was watching them both. Then she set the sewing aside and took Lucy's small hand in hers. "As long as I breathe," she said, her voice catching. "Always." Inside, the lamp flickered gold on the walls. The house, once filled with cold and silence, now held something harder to name. Not triumph, not victory, just light, and the quiet, steady pulse of home. "Bye-bye,"